Hey guys, so that's pretty bad. Hey guys, hey guys, welcome back. It's Brandon here, and my wife Abby. So today we really wanted to go over. I did have somebody reach out to me asking kind of for some like training advice, stuff like that. So basically, what I'm doing today is going to be going over a video on coaching distance runners, but not just coaching them, but more of like a periodization. If you don't know what periodization means, it's basically like the long-term coaching plan, right? So it's like for like one season, you can even periodize like multiple seasons out. But basically, we're going to be going over the most basic form of periodization, so more of like a season of periodization. So like for like track, for example, that's actually what we're going to be kind of focusing on and using as an example. Is going to be periodization for a track season for a distance runner.
For high school.
High school. So kind of distance, mid-distance. And it's not going to be like a plan that you can take and just implement. There is actually no plan like that. If you want to coach your athletes the best you can, honestly, you need to make a custom plan to your environment, the athletes, and all the other factors that can be taken into consideration, like the races you have. There's so many factors that go into coaching. So really just making sure that you're taking all the factors in consideration is going to be really important. So kind of diving right in, let's go over like what most coaches do and then what I kind of believe and what I kind of do myself. I think you have somewhat of a similar approach, but correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if you're this other way. So most coaches are going to be like a base phase. So what that base phase entails is a lot of mileage with like hardly any workouts at all. And actually, some coaches will do no workouts during the base phase and just get tons and tons of miles. Or maybe not even tons of miles. Maybe if they're a low mileage coach, they're not getting a whole lot of miles. But the main thing is it's mainly miles. And it's kind of like building up miles is basically the focus of the base phase. Typically, if you have a high school program that is a little bit more, I wouldn't say experienced, but like involved would be a good word for it. If you have a high school program that's a little more involved, they're going to be doing this during their off-season training. Like you guys have off-season training at Brighton, so you can switch this way too if you want. But yeah, your off-season training at Brighton essentially would be like your base phase, right? So same thing at Conifer. We do have. I don't actually coach the distance runners at Conifer. I just help with the distance runners at Conifer. Essentially, so I kind of like look at their plans every once in a while, and then I'll just like offer advice as it's needed, stuff like that. So my main advice like the athletes and stuff. So my main focus at Conifer is actually right now sprints, hurdles, and a little bit of jumps. I'm not the best at long triple, but I focus a lot on high jump, hurdles, and sprints right now. And that's kind of what I've really enjoyed coaching and what I kind of really want to coach, honestly. So that's what my focus has been. But I have coached distance runners, and that's where I started. And I coach myself, and I've coached other athletes post-collegiately and stuff like that. And I've hung around Metro to help out with distance coaching there. So I do have a lot of experience here, and I've done a ton of research on it just so I can coach myself and stuff like that. Like right now, my current goals are like OTQ and stuff like that. So it does take a pretty good periodization plan to make sure that you can qualify for Olympic trials and stuff like that. So I do hopefully know what I'm talking about. At least I think I know what I'm talking about. And then my wife here actually coaches, Abby, coaches middle distance at Brighton High School. So
yeah, I coach 4 up to the 2 mile. I wasn't originally supposed to coach the 2 mile, but a lot of our kids...
you're coaching the 2 mile now.
Yeah. A lot of our kids are doing... they'll either do 8 mile, 2 mile, or they'll be mile, 2 mile. And so I just ended up adopting the 2 milers as well. But my main focus is the 4-8. That's kind of like the base that I give all of the athletes.
So that actually kind of gets us started on like one of the most important things too to consider when you're making a periodized plan, right? So we just talked about the first phase is kind of like your base phase, right? But going back a little bit is the event you're coaching will be really, really relevant if you coach the way I coach. Because I kind of customize my workouts, as you guys will see. Maybe not see, but as you hear. I should have I'm going to do another video on this. We're going to go a little bit more in depth. This is going to be a really broad overview. We're going to try to make it somewhat quick. We're already kind of dragging on. So, but basically, the event you're going to coach will matter. We'll go into that in just a sec here. So you have like your base we're going back to your typical, what most schools do, right? So you have your base phase, and then you go into a phase where you add in workouts. And this is where it can really differ depending on the school. There are a lot of schools that will just go straight into speed work, and they'll go like mileage, 200s, like very fast 200s. I'm like, okay, where's the rest of it?
Yeah.
So there's a lot more to it than just like mileage. Like, it's not just anaerobic or aerobic and anaerobic. So aerobic being with oxygen, anaerobic workouts being without oxygen. It's not just that. There are workouts and different categories within aerobic, anaerobic type of workouts. We're not going to dive into that. That's more for the advanced video. But know that there is more to like mileage and speed. There's not just those two. Essentially, that's like simplified aerobic, anaerobic.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it. So we'll kind of dive into what that looks like a little bit further. But yeah, then you go into that. Sometimes people will do like what they call aerobic, a little bit more of like an aerobic workout phase after their base phase, or maybe they go right into anaerobic. But then you'll have your anaerobic phase after that, and then you'll have like your competition, like target competition kind of phase, where maybe you're doing more tune-up stuff.
Taper, yeah.
And like a taper at the end of the competition phase, typically.
Yeah.
So you kind of have your base phase. I don't know. I forgot what actually most coaches call the middle phase. Do you remember?
I was literally just looking at this.
I don't remember.
I call it phase 1, phase 2.
Pre-competition is what they call it in a lot of books.
Pre-competition.
So a lot of books. I just know what I'm doing with the phases and all that. But it's called pre-competition. So you have base phase. I think it goes straight into pre-competition from there, and then it goes in competition. For most schools, will kind of follow that program. And the competition, and like so. It's like, and then they just forget about the phase before that. Essentially, what happens. Yeah. And I kind of take a little bit different approach, a little bit different philosophy on all this. I like to make sure that we're kind of touching on everything, and so if we draw that, we're drawing like a pyramid, right? So you have your base phase on the bottom. We have our pre-competition phase would be the next step up. Competition phase would be that final step, and maybe like if you want to put a taper phase, would be even above that. Yeah. So you have like a little pyramid, right? I take a more of like what I call a funnel approach. It's actually been referred to, I think, in books as a funnel approach even. I do this even with sprinters, honestly. So basically what I start at is I'll still probably start with like a base. If you guys hear like clinking and stuff, it's probably our animals. We have a cat and 2 dogs. So bear with us. But basically what I start with is I'll still start with like a little bit of a base phase, but I'll be like a little more shortened compared to most. And that's our dog chasing the cat. But then I will quickly go into basically the base phase will have a lot of mileage and maybe some aerobic workouts you're starting to see some. And that's gonna be like progression runs, stuff like that. So where you're starting at a pace and then you're dropping down to more of like a lactic threshold kind of zone area. But it's like very progressive, and you maybe drop 10 seconds per mile. Yeah. Depending on how many miles you're doing, maybe you drop 20 seconds per mile. So you just progressively drop down. So you start very aerobic, and then you get closer to anaerobic. But normally you don't go too far into anaerobic with those types of workouts. But then also on the other end of the spectrum, I'll do like hill sprints to start. Yeah. Typically, you don't want to start with straight out like sprints, because that can get your athlete injured and cause them to peak early. So I start with hill sprints because it's very hard. You're using a lot more strength as opposed to fast twitch muscle fibers. So essentially it's a little bit harder. It actually builds a better foundation for that speed work later on. So a little bit of like hill sprints, but very short hill sprints. And then as you kind of go, maybe you start lengthening the hill sprints. So with periodization, it's always important to remember that you're increasing stressors. So there's different ways to stress the body. There's faster paces. With running, there's faster paces, longer reps, and shorter rest. Is there anything I missed there? And maybe like the terrain could be another stressor, like uphill.
In track, you're not really like.
Or grass, like running on grass, would be a softer surface, so it's better for impact, but then harder to run through.
Because
so more of a stressor on the muscles, less of a stressor though on the body and the physical aspects.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of stuff. There's a lot that goes into that, and I could make so many videos on this, but I'm trying to make this a very brief video. This could be like an hour long.
Yes.
But if you guys are interested, then you're definitely going to watch through the whole thing to make sure that you're coaching your kids correctly. It's an hour worth of your time for a season. Like, that's okay. So, but yeah, so what I take is that funnel approach. Let me kind of dive right back into that. So we have our progression runs and then our speed stuff. Raw speed, though. Like, this is like you're not digging in. You're not getting really lactic acid build up in your legs. It's just like these actually the strength speed. And then you progress slowly. So we change these stressors. And typically I don't change the rest at all on the speed portion. What I'll end up doing is I'll add a couple more hill repeats, like week to week, or like even from like beginning, like we did 1 day of hill repeats after like maybe a couple miles. Like like for myself, I'll do like 6 miles and then I'll do sprints on the hill. But for a beginner runner, you might be doing 4 miles and then like 4 sprints up a hill. And very short sprints, probably ranging from like 10 to 20 seconds. But then you're going to progress, and like what we would do is we'd add in more hill repeats. That would be a good way to, and you only want to change probably one stressor. Go ahead.
Yeah, you could do more hill repeats. You could change the distance of your hill repeats. So you could do a little bit more of a circuit. Or you can change the reps and the pace. Yeah,
I mean, a lot of that, and like the pace. Typically, for the pace for the hill repeats, I'm almost 100% all out, anyways. But as we get further in, you'll see the pacing will make a difference. So, but yeah, the hill, and then you maybe progress to like something like 10 hill repeats that are like 10 to 15 seconds long. And then once you get there, maybe you start doing more flat sprints, but at 95%, 90% of max. And then you're going to progress to 95 the next week, 100%, almost like basically all out 60-meter sprints, which shouldn't take a whole lot of a toll on the body, honestly. But you got to be careful of peaking too early with that kind of work. But typically it's not too much of a problem.
So just a clarifying question for myself when you're talking about this. Are you doing, you talk about like the next week. So are these like bleeding into your next phase then? Like, would you be doing those?
We're not in the next phase yet. We're kind of still in a base phase, essentially. Okay. So then kind of progressing in, and I totally forgot to hit the record button, so this is all live.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I'm not going to be able to edit any of this. So essentially, our next phase, maybe we're going to move from, not even a phase, honestly. It's like still kind of in base phase. You kind of start adding in some lactic threshold workouts. Even before you finish the hill sprints, typically I would probably start adding in what I call lactic threshold or aerobic threshold even. Typically with like a track runner, you kind of almost skip aerobic threshold because that's kind of integrated with the progression runs. Maybe you, instead of doing progression run, you do aerobic threshold, which is like marathon pace stuff, like what they could run a marathon in if you do like calculators and all that.
For high school though, having the progression run. For high school though, for having the progression run is definitely, I think, the better way to go instead of making them try to hold pace for a certain amount of time. Some of them don't have the attention span for it, or they just don't understand pacing enough to really know what that, or the strength to hold it. So the progression run's definitely the better way to go for high school students. Yeah,
I mean, I guess we should kind of move on though and kind of keep going down the line here. So there's a lot of types of workouts and it's hard to explain them all. I really should just make a whole video on that by itself. I mean, this is like super complicated. I'm just trying to give you guys we're trying to give you guys a base framework here. We can make so many, and maybe we'll do a whole series on it, honestly. But right now, I'm just trying to get something out because we already started track season. But Essentially, after that, we go from our more anaerobic stuff, progressing down. And as we do this, it's important that every 2 to 3 weeks that you retouch on something you've already worked on. So like our progression runs, our aerobic runs, and our hill sprints. We need to retouch on those every once in a while, like 2 to 3 weeks. And when you do this, you have to only work about 3/4 to even almost like half of what you normally do for the workout when you're building it. So then as you progress, you only have to do about 3/4 of that to maintain it. And it'll only have to be like one day you set aside. And you can almost do combination workouts. You do you could even do half hill sprints one day after a progression run or something like that. And that would work both of them. And you just cut both of them in half. Now you have progression runs half, and then hill sprints that's half. You can do both of those. It's like you can basically one day to retouch on both of those workouts. That's kind of the way to do it, honestly, if you ask me. But then as we kind of move on, we're going from like lactic threshold, so where we're borderline becoming lactic acid, where we can't get rid of the lactic acid, but we're right at that threshold. That's what lactic threshold is. And then you're probably going to start introducing some more like 100-meter sprints. But these 100-meter sprints could follow essentially a lactic, for example, lactic threshold workout. Typically, I mean, that's a kind of a more advanced thing to really be doing. So you might want to set aside a whole day, but maybe add some mileage in. I don't know. It really depends on your level of runners. If they're really new, then just do 100-meter sprints.
Yeah.
And do a good amount of them. So you want to probably be doing at least 10 100-meter sprints and probably have about 3-ish minutes rest in between that. Now we're getting more into, what do they call it? It's not like raw speed anymore. You're actually probably more of what I think they call it speed endurance, is the technical term for it.
I don't know, but yeah.
So now we're more into that kind of speed endurance realm with anaerobic lactic thresholds. But now if we keep progressing, we're getting into VO2 max / lactic threshold VO2 max mix, which I call CV
critical velocity.
Yeah, critical velocity. Actually, I think Tin Man uses that term all the time. I don't think he pinned it. So there's a whole debate about this. But basically, it's 10K, 15K pace. So if I like to go with my training based on race distance paces. So it's about 10K to 15K race pace, right? So then we're doing those. And that's going to hit lactic threshold. So you probably don't need to be retouching a lactic threshold really here with CV stuff, if you're doing CV stuff. But also, you could be doing VO2 max stuff. But the CV stuff also works VO2 max and lactic thresholds. Almost works both systems. That's why it's so advantageous. So this should be a huge bulk of your preseason work. So now we're talking about that preseason phase, right? So, but preseason could literally be the big pre-competition. That's what they call it.
Yeah.
But this could literally be, we're talking more like you can still be racing in pre-competition phase, but you're not. This is not your focus, right?
No, yeah.
So with distance running, it's a whole long progression, but you want to peak by like your target race, league, state, whatever it may be if you're a high school runner, or like if you're targeting a marathon. But we're basically with this funnel method, what we're doing is we're working towards specificity towards the event. If you're a 2-mile runner, you're working towards that 3,200 meter pace, which is essentially VO2 max. Mile pace is really just, I forgot Jack Daniels calls it, but it's basically, there's like a mile pace workout where you do mile pace stuff. You're working towards those mile pace workouts. 800, you're working towards what we call like lactic tolerance workouts are really good workouts for 800 meter runners. But yeah, you're essentially working towards that pace of your goal race pace for that athlete, but slightly faster.
Yes.
Just ever so slightly faster. That's kind of what you're working towards with these workouts. So now we're moving from the CV on our speed side of things. We're probably looking at some maybe longer speed endurance stuff. So like closer to 150. And then you're getting into special endurance now with 200s. And maybe you're starting to do some lactic tolerance here. So basically what a lactic tolerance workout is where you have like let's just use like 200 meters, for example. So 200 meters at like 600 race pace to 800 race pace, but then very short rest where you're taking probably for like a newer athlete, only a minute rest would probably be pretty good. But for a more experienced athlete, probably looking at 30 seconds rest because you got to build up lactic acid and you don't want to be clearing out.
I know we're not talking about workouts, but one of my favorite workouts to do in this kind of realm is broken whatever it may be. So if it's like a broken 800.
No, go on.
Sorry.
Go. Out.
Come on, Doug. But if you do a broken, for example, if you do a broken 800, you'd have them run a 600 at, I would have them do it slightly faster than race pace.
I wouldn't do lactic tolerance with an 800, full 800. You're doing an 800
or
pace.
you could do well, it's a broken 800, so they get a rest in the middle.
Yeah. Be careful with 800s. Like, obviously, more experienced athletes could do this because you're going 800 meter pace. You don't want to be doing the whole race distance in a workout.
No, that's correct. Yeah. I would do mile pace for that workout.
Yeah.
But you could do a 600 at mile race pace, and then you would do I give them 45 seconds rest, and then have them do as like pretty much all out 200 after that.
Yeah.
And then they get a little bit longer rest between each.
Yeah, it can really depend. I mean, like for like today, for example, what I had my sprinters do was like it was super simple. It was like 300s, but such an amazing workout. Literally, somebody pukes like every time.
Yeah.
And they always roll around on the ground like moaning because their like lactic acid buildup is so intense.
Yeah.
If you want to do that, like I do 300s, and they're like 95% of max. So they're like really going for it. And then I'm like, all right, this next one I want you at 97%.
Yeah.
The next one I want you at 100%. So basically what I'm doing is I'm changing the perceived effort value. So they're increasing their effort, but their times almost stay the same. It's pretty interesting how that all works out there, honestly. One of my favorite workouts, I've coached a lot of kids to sub 50 400s with that workout. So that workout is what I credit, for the most part, being the workout that gets them into the sub 50 second 400 essentially. Yeah. So or one of the main ones. So but what you could do more, maybe like 300s, for example, at 800 meter pace, very short recovery. So like typically for 300, you're probably looking at minute to even maybe 3 minutes rest for a distance runner, but not all out at 800 meter pace. You'd maybe go and drop the rest down just a little bit. And I mean, it really depends on how well the athlete responds to the lactic tolerance. We could go on a whole other video about lactic tolerance. But just know it's like they should still feel a little bit of burn basically when they start the next rep. Yeah. So that's kind of lactic tolerance, right? All right, kind of moving on because we're dragging on again. We go from like that CV workout to VO2 max, which is like our 2 mile race pace. Could be 5 mile race pace. It's like a range from 5K to 2 mile. So we have our 5K to 2 mile race pace. That's VO2 max. CV kind of overlaps that. So that's why CV is so great. So you don't need to hit VO2 max very long, honestly. You could drop down to almost mile pace very quickly. Yeah. So we're at 800 pace with lactic tolerance / special endurance stuff, where you're probably going a little bit more like 95 to 100%, but very short reps, like 200 meter reps. Mallows. Hey. Mallows, stop.
Come here.
Our dog. He's licking the other dog's ear. All right, let's get back into it. Sorry for the loud yelling. It's the only way to get him to stop. So essentially, you're going from special endurance to, where was that?
I don't remember.
So you have VO2 max, and you've got at the same time you're probably working. Let's say we're working towards mile 1600 meter, because that's like a very common high school race, right?
No.
That's why you're probably been training. If you have a distance runner in high school, you're probably training them for the mile essentially. They may swing more towards the 2 mile or the 800. Really depends. But you could train all your athletes for the mile, and then maybe you'll just see athletes kind of specialize more in the 2 mile or the 800 from there. Yeah. Because the 2 mile is almost a middle distance event, even though the kids think it's so long. It's like when I'm in college, I'm like, oh, cool, 2 miles. It's like middle distance.
10K.
I'm doing 10K, 5Ks, 8Ks, and stuff like that. So those are distance. And then once you get after college, you're in marathons and half marathons. Yeah. So yeah, you have your VO2 max, and then we have our other end, which is kind of getting more into the mile realm. Really depending on what your approach was, if you went into lactic tolerance. But you're gonna start getting into like your, I would say, sub-mile race pace and VO2 max. And VO2 max will probably be short-lived. And then when you progress, and now we're probably talking competition phase. When you progress into that, then you're gonna probably keep your speed side about the same and just kind of retouch on all the other speed aspects as you kind of build into it. And you can start adding on speed aspects on the end of your aerobic runs.
Yeah.
But make sure you do the aerobic aspect first. So like a lactic threshold, which I'm about to do tomorrow. I'm going to do like 4 by mile with 300, 200, 200, 100 at the end. But that's like, I wouldn't make your high school kids do that if they're new. That'd be a lot of miles.
That'd be mean.
But that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. And that's going to be kind of the same thing where I'm combining workouts here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a more advanced thing to do, honestly. But as you're at the end of the season, you could probably start introducing just a little bit of that. So just to put a little bit of speed on it at the end of like a threshold or something like that. And again, we have to touch on those workouts, those categories that we hit. So like the like anaerobic threshold that we talked about. Sorry, lactic threshold that we talked about. You want to do half to 3/4 of that. So you could do half of that and the other half be the speed aspect. I don't know. But you want to be just retouching, and then we want to be hitting VO2 max and then retouching on the speed stuff, essentially.
Yeah.
Our next phase is basically you're going to be retouching on all the stuff that we worked on before for probably one of the workouts during the week. You're going to have probably 2 to 3 workouts during the week now.
Yeah.
For one of those workouts, you're going to be retouching and everything. The other workout, essentially what I want to do is we're going to be running our goal race pace, but slightly faster. So, or like the race pace you're currently running, but slightly faster. So it'd be more of our goal race pace. And maybe even a little bit faster than your goal race pace for the athletes. Kind of going in. And you're going to get, so if you're running like mile race pace, typically you're going to get about just over equal recovery, like compared to time, or double that.
Yeah.
So you can almost do double. So like you're doing 400 meters, and you're doing those, let's say you're a 4-minute miler. I don't know, it makes it easy, right?
Yeah.
60 seconds. So just faster, you'd be at 59, 58 seconds for a 4-minute miler, right? But then, like, you're going to run that rep. The amount of rest you're going to get is probably going to be anywhere from about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes rest in between those if you want to work that, like, mile race pace, essentially. And then, as you progress with those workouts, one factor that I really like to change is time for rest. So let's say you're at 1:30, you drop down to 1:15, a minute. Like that's how you become a pretty solid miler, honestly. So you're doing like 400-meter repeats, but you're starting to drop that rest down as they adapt to the stimulus. That's going to be the good way to progress at that point. So once you're in kind of competition season, so maybe you have a couple target races and you keep progressing that as you go throughout the competition phases with all those target races. So then hopefully you just start to see slight drops in time at this point.
Yeah.
I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of dropping in time. Most of the drops in time, you're probably going to see the beginning, early season, stuff like that. Anything you want to kind of throw in on like middle distance stuff or anything like that?
Well, just touching on that workout that you were talking about. Touching on that workout that you were talking about with the 400s, you can do that for an 800 runner with 200s. That was one of my actual favorite workouts that we did in college, where you just, basically it's like 200 cut downs. So you're trying to progressively get faster while your rest just gets shorter and shorter. Which is, I mean, it does help you get like that endurance down to keep maintaining the speed as well. So
and even 2-milers can essentially do like 800 or 600 meter repeats where they do cut that downs, as well. Yeah. And but if they're a 2-miler, if they're a pure 2-miler, you're probably not gonna be hitting
much. Speed.
Mile pace would be your speed base.
Yeah.
You would hit mile pace stuff before, like when you're hitting probably like VO2 max stuff, but then the VO2 max stuff you're gonna be going back and touching on the stuff. So you can sway each side of the funnel, but I take like almost like a 2-prong approach on everything. And I kind of work towards the paces of each other. So that's why it's a funnel method, right? So that's kind of what I do with my sprinters. I do with my distance runners. I think it works great for all of them. Because then, here's the reason why I think this method works so well. The reason why is because a lot of the problem with the pyramid model is like a lot of coaches don't retouch on things. And even then, I feel like there's a lot of issues that can happen. But you're building that base phase, and then it gets forgotten about in the next phase. Like that, like they don't retouch on it, or they don't retouch on it enough. I'm getting the best of both worlds when I'm taking the speed approach and the distance approach and funneling in. Yeah. So, and then you have to make sure you're still retouching on those I'm like showing it on the table here, but nobody can see. You have to make sure that you're really touching on those aspects of training.
Mm-hmm.
But you only have to do a quarter, even a half of the workouts that you normally would do would cover that.
Yeah.
So that's where you see a lot of, like with the pyramid model. Yeah, people just keep building, and then they're at the end of the season they're just like speed work. And actually, the most problematic issue I feel like with high school athletics, or not athletics, but high school track and field, is that they do just speed work.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like it's like either miles or speed work. I feel like that's the most common problem. I see it in so many programs, and I feel like it's not doing your kids justice. They're like, what you see maybe your distance runners look pretty decent,
Mm-hmm.
pretty good at the beginning of the season, and they never really get better.
Mm-hmm.
They just stay the same. They fall off. They get worse even. Like,
yeah.
you should see huge improvements from the beginning of the season to the end.
Yeah.
Like, massive. Maybe like a school that does all speed work, maybe they're beating it at the beginning of the season, but by the end of the season, where it really matters, those schools are going to come out on top.
Mm-hmm.
Like, almost guarantee it. I've seen it so many times happen this way.
Yeah.
And it just drives me crazy to see these schools keep doing it, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm not the coach of all the schools.
Yeah.
I don't know. And maybe they have methods that maybe some schools are definitely doing way better than I am, but this is kind of what I'm seeing. So
Yeah, definitely. I don't have anything else.
I thought you were going to say something.
No.
So I hope that helps out. Leave comments below if you have any questions. I know this wasn't very structured. It was just us really talking. It's kind of like a little podcast.
Where
but
he talks the whole time, but you know, it's fine.
I talk the whole time and yell at Mallows for licking Noah's ear.
Mallow, stop.
Again. How many times we got to tell you, bud? Are you stressed because this is an unknown room? I don't let the dogs in. Oh my gosh. In this room very often. As you can see why. Expensive equipment everywhere in my office, and I have all this like camera gear here. But yeah, I hope that really helped out, guys, and it wasn't super long. We're at 34. Oh, we did pretty good. 34 minutes. Look at that.
It's every time I talk to you, we're like, we're rambling on a little too much.
The rambler over here. But yeah, I mean, if you guys want Abby to come back, comment below. like the video.
If you just want me to take over the channel, I can do that too.
Whoa. Not happening. But yeah, that's a general overview. But
Hey.
if you guys have any questions, leave those in the comments below. If you guys want me to make videos or anything, let me know in the comments below too, because we can make more specific videos on things that we maybe didn't make very clear. Again, this is why coaching distance running is not easy.
No.
It's because there's so much to talk about.
So much factor.
Hey, go on.
Stop playing with the cat.
There's so much to talk about. Sorry. As you can see, we deal with this all the time. Ridiculousness. But there's so much to talk about in one video, so let us know. I'll try to close the door next time. We're not letting the animals back in because they just drive us crazy. And the cat's playing with the cords, so we gotta go pretty soon here. But yeah. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I hope this was helpful. I know this is like there's a lot of rambling, there's a lot of